Hi, everyone. As Dr. Lutz said, thank you so much for being here. Before we begin this town hall, I just want to invite you just to take a moment to make yourself present to this space that we are in as we learn more about the urgent need for a divestment here at Villanova. So please feel free to engage in whatever way you feel most comfortable. So, in the gift of this new day, in the gift of the present moment, in the gift of time and eternity intertwined, let us be grateful. Let us be attentive. Let us be open to what has never happened before. In the gift of this new day, in the gift of the present moment, in the gift of time and eternity intertwined. Amen. So let us be thankful for this time that we have together, and I will turn it back over to Dr. Lutz.
Thank you, Kathy. I am going to start by thanking people. I want to thank the Student Government Association, which made its co-sponsorship of this event official by passing a formal resolution in favor of fossil fuel divestment this Wednesday. I also want to thank the Faculty Congress and the University Staff Council, the Strategic Initiative for Climate Justice and Sustainability, and Falvey Library for co-sponsoring this event. I also want to thank the Town Hall Planning Committee, which was a some 30-odd group of students, faculty, and staff who all worked together to make this happen today. I especially want to acknowledge Tim Horner from Faculty for Peace and Justice, who was in charge of our greeters out front. I want to acknowledge Sean Proctor, Director of Marketing and Communication, the Manager of Marketing and Communication at Falvey Library, who gave us essential help in our communications. And I also want to especially thank Melanie Menkovich, who has been doing very earnest work throughout and was really sweating bullets in front of us just now. We really appreciate everything that Melanie has done to make this event happen today. We could not have done it without her. I also want to thank Neil Horgan, our Vice President for Finance and Administration and Chief Financial Officer, and Shane McAndrew, our Chief Investment Officer, for sharing information about our endowment and our investment policies in advance of this town hall. Neil and Shane met with a small group of faculty last week for an hour and a half to answer our questions about Villanova's endowment and our investing. And I'm really grateful for the information they provided to us. And we have a fabulous lineup of speakers. Those should take about 50 minutes. And then I'm going to warn the speakers in advance. I will be ruthless about keeping people short on time because I'm respectful of everyone's time in here. And then we will have our student body president, Jose Garcia Orozco, who will moderate a question and answer session. I'm going to start with some framing remarks. I'm an English professor. I have no special expertise in science, policy, or investing. I'm here because I'm a mother. Okay, I became involved in climate activism because I don't want to leave an uninhabitable planet to my children. That's my youngest daughter, Evelyn. She joined a climate protest at Villanova organized by students back in spring of 2016. She's standing on the Oreo watching student protesters. She marched with hundreds of students from the Oreo to Townhall that day, and she carried a sign that said, "This can't wait until I'm bigger." I'm here today because Evelyn's bigger. Oh, there she is. And not nearly enough has changed in the 4 years since she stood on the Oreo. Just to be clear, my daughter is not from a demographic that is most at risk. Okay, there we go. Climate change has exacerbated global inequality, and communities of color around the world are suffering disproportionate harm. The highly industrialized global north has done the most to cause climate change, and the emerging economies of the global south have experienced the most damage. Meanwhile, okay, there we go. Let's admit someone into the Zoom. Can we do that? Okay. Meanwhile, At Villanova, we've been taking our time. Back in 2007, we pledged to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, but we know that worldwide scientific consensus tells us that we have to move faster. Our campus sustainability plan, which is available online, sounds admirable and ambitious, but it remains largely aspirational. Almost all the projects listed on it are under-resourced, if not unfunded. Our full-time campus sustainability manager left Villanova last June. This was the person who managed and executed our climate action plan, who oversaw our sustainability efforts, who monitored our energy consumption on campus. That position has been vacant for 7 months. There are some bright spots. The Strategic Initiative for Climate Justice and Sustainability has been encouraging faculty to integrate sustainability into their teaching and into their research. And the College of Arts and Sciences has been encouraging individual departments to review their practices and set sustainability goals. There's an even brighter spot, which is soon we will have a brand new position as Chief Sustainability Officer. Father John Abubakar, former provincial of the province of Nigeria and an expert in international development and environmental sustainability, is going to take on a leadership role. He's going to start this summer. He's pictured there with Father Art Procaro, who is here in the audience. Hi, Father Art. So we're glad you're here. And this is a really exciting, this is a brand new position. Assuming that we do fill the unfilled campus sustainability manager position soon, that means we will have 2 positions at Villanova that are dedicated to sustainability, which is a great sign. The next bright spot is could be maybe more exciting. Okay. Thank you. As of today, Villanova has a power purchase agreement in effect. As of today, it starts today, which provides 92% of our total campus electricity needs from a renewable source, wind. This is a gigantic step forward. We owe special thanks to project manager Joe Ungaro, who negotiated that agreement. So that's really exciting. We went from 50% to 92% of our electricity being renewable. So now, since we've taken this great big step forward and we have moved toward more renewable energy, this is a great time for us to now address another really big challenge, which is putting our endowment in line with our goals to achieve carbon neutrality. It only likes Melanie. So, and I want to thank Shane McAndrew for providing this information about our endowment to us for the town hall. We currently have an endowment of $1.2 billion. Less than 4% of that endowment is invested in oil and gas companies via mutual funds. We have no public investment policy statement, but Villanova follows socially responsible investment guidelines from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Those guidelines encourage investing in companies with business models that are compatible with the Paris Agreement, and they do not require divestment. They recommend evaluating divestment from fossil fuels, so they recommend it without requiring that. And, okay. The last thing I want to share about our endowment is the threshold for divestment that our Board of Trustees has agreed upon. And they have set the threshold pretty high. They say divestment could only be considered in cases where investment is inconsistent with the university's values and abhorrent to the university community. And that would be pursued only after other options have been exhausted. There are a lot of universities, some 299 as of today, who have already decided that fossil fuel divestment reaches that high threshold, including 5 of our peer institutions who have announced divestment from fossil fuels in the last 2 years alone. Why not us? We have an amazing lineup of speakers who are going to share their thoughts on fossil fuels and divestment for you today. So I'm going to let them all introduce each other. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Hopefully you all are doing really well today. It's supposed to snow, apparently, I've been told, so good luck for us. A little bit about myself. My name is Shara Rodriguez. I am a senior accounting major with a minor in business law and corporate governance. And I can't stay here for too long, unfortunately. I do have other commitments, but I hope that what I say today you are all able to internalize in some way. Climate change is not a new topic. We have been discussing it for such a long time, going through so many possible solutions to one of the world's greatest and biggest threats to our survival. In doing so, we have convinced the people of the world it is their responsibility to do something and enact change. Although that is true, this idea moves the fault of climate change onto civilians, telling us if we recycle and use electric cars, everything will be fine. When in reality, it's big corporations and organizations and their systematic downfalls that are the biggest perpetrators of climate change. Although we all have a part to play, they are not equal parts, and they have never been equal parts. Climate change also does not affect our people equally. White, cisgendered, able-bodied men are less likely to suffer at the hands of climate change than their counterparts. This is due to immense systematic racism and lack of funding being directed to marginalized people who live in the very areas that are considered dumping grounds of bigger organizations. My people are suffering immensely because of this. Fossil fuels are burnt through and in turn are burning us. But as civilians, we have not created this. Unlike the massive dent bigger parties at play have caused. In an effort to combat the obvious effects businesses and other corporations and the top percentage of people have had on the earth, their investment in fossil fuels, the creation of the net zero plan came forth. Villanova, as of 2007, is a supporter of the net zero plan. The net zero plan is a pledge that several bodies have taken to bring their fossil fuel investments to a net of zero by 2050. The thing about that, though, is Villanova holding up their end of the bargain? I don't know. I don't have access to that information. As a private institution based on the values of Caritas, Veritas, and Unitas, it is interesting to note that Villanova has and probably does play a part in the inequity caused by climate change and fossil fuel investments due to their lack of Gilead knowledge. It is time that we care more about this. This is not the first and probably will not be the last town hall that we have, but wouldn't it be great if it was? As we said, Villanova has that $1.2 billion endowment fund. How is it being used? I did that on purpose. How is that being given to students? Where is that information at? How are students being able to find this information? We don't know much about it, nor how it is being used. Honestly, up until a couple weeks ago, I didn't know it existed. And it is not our responsibility as students, the direct stakeholders in this university, to have to go out and find it. As a student, I would love to have access to the information as it does affect us as a student body directly. As direct stakeholders in this university, it would be great to know where the money is going and how it is being allocated. It is Villanova's responsibility to ensure their stakeholders have easy and equitable access to this information. We do not all have computers. We do not have access to the things that others don't have, like, to be for real for a second. We made a commitment in 2007. It is now 2023, and I personally don't see it. I have been involved with Villanova since I was 14 years old through several initiatives Villanova has to offer. I have walked these halls since 2014. I don't see much change, if I'm being honest. This is not to say the change isn't happening, but how can change happen if it's happening behind closed doors? Greenwashing, for those of you who do not know, is the act of companies marketing sustainability and environmental consciousness as a priority, but are not making any notable sustainability efforts or even making it a priority. As a result, and I am not alone in this thought, it is easy for us to believe that Villanova is partaking in greenwashing. Until we see actual, equitable change that is transparent and effective, instead of pretty worded promises and prayers, we cannot meet that goal we agreed to meet in 2007. 2050 is a lot closer than we think it is. Please do not let that time go by. We cannot claim the words on our shield if we cannot be truthful, unified, and equitable in this task. And I hope something I said today has been able to stick with you guys and go into your hearts, because this is now, not tomorrow, now. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for the opportunity to speak with everyone today. My name is Jessica Mangstav. I'm a graduate of Villanova's 2015 Accelerated BSN cohort. I'm a registered nurse specializing in maternal child health, as well as the program manager for the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. The Alliance is a national network of nurses and nursing organizations working at the intersection of human health and the environment. And our members work to inform and educate patients and communities on how environmental and societal factors like fossil fuels influence health, while advocating to support protections that will make those threats less likely. And as we discuss the urgency of the climate crisis and necessary steps to address the crisis and ensure equity and health expeditiously, I'd like us to keep in mind a very poignant Native American proverb. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate some key terms for folks in attendance with us today, as I know many of us may likely be coming from different experiences, different perspectives, and different levels within the conversation. Fossil fuel includes coal, oil, or gas that comes from fossilized plants and animals and is burned to create energy for transportation and for public and private energy. They're used for everything from heating homes to powering entire buildings, for moving cars to trains and airplanes, and they also include consumer products like gasoline, natural gas, and propane. Greenhouse gases are heat-trapping gases that are emitted from fossil fuels during both extraction processes and utilization. And that's an important distinction to make because we often think of just utilization of fossil fuels in the energy industry. Even the extractive processes, fracking, oil extraction, natural gas extraction, are very harmful to health and devastating to communities in which those processes are taking place. And the divestment, as we've started to discuss, in the case of fossil fuels, is the intentional movement of funds like stocks and investments from those industries into more renewable energy, Another important term to make mention of, which I'm glad the previous speaker started to discuss this topic because it's very important, are frontline communities, which are groups in society that are physically and socially experience the greatest effects of polluting industries and the resulting climate crisis, the climate change effects. A term that you often hear is first and worst because they are in the closest proximity to polluting industries and they experience the greatest amount of harmful health impacts. And then the same thing with the resulting climate crisis. They are often in areas where resources are limited, infrastructure is limited, so they're experiencing the worst effects of the climate crisis as well. In addition to disproportionate exposures, frontline communities often have fewer resources and less political power to combat the systems of injustice that they've been faced with and that place them into these situations. Next slide, please. So this graphic just gives a great overview of the science behind the main contributing components to climate change, including the overuse of fossil fuels. So on the left side of the graphic, we see naturally occurring greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide that keep the planet warm. And then on the left side, we see how the overuse and overconsumption of those greenhouse gases have created the greenhouse gas effect, which contributes to what was initially discussed as global warming and now is known as climate change. Climate change has been a long-term process, with effects being more strongly felt every year, and the effects, as we know, are much broader than global warming that we initially discussed back when we were children. Weather patterns are drastically changing and more severely every year, every season, affecting folks' health. Recent severe examples of this are the severe ice storms that occurred in 2021 in the southern part of the country, and the extreme heat wave that occurred in the Pacific Northwest in 2021 as well. Next slide again, thank you. So this graphic also gives a great example of the different impacts that climate change has on folks' health. And it's basically all-encompassing because climate change affects everything from your cardiovascular health, your respiratory health, your reproductive health, your mental health. It basically affects every body system in the human body. Changing weather patterns causes increases of drought, which affects food production, which leads to food insecurity, which can then lead to climate migration, which can then cause a cascading effect leading to climate migration conflict. There are increases in allergy seasons, more severe and more longer allergy seasons, increases in vector-borne diseases, which in the Northeast, everyone is familiar with the increasing rates of Lyme disease. In the Southeast, in Atlanta where I am now, cases of vector-borne diseases that were not even prevalent in certain geographical areas, like malaria or dengue fever, are becoming more prevalent. Also, a very important monetary fact, since we're talking about facts and figures and finances today, fossil fuel generated air pollution and the climate change that's linked to it are associated with over $800 billion in healthcare costs every single year. So in addition to redirecting funds in divestment, we can think about all of the money, not just the physical trauma that can be saved, the funds that can be saved and redirected towards supportive programs for different groups in society. Next slide. So this just kind of goes further into the different physical impacts that climate change brought on by the fossil fuel industry has on groups within society. As we know, the heat seasons are increasing in intensity and in length in pretty much all geographic locations across the country, and that means many groups are at risk. Extreme heat will exacerbate, like I said, both cardiovascular and respiratory health. The temperature rising, in addition to the pollutants that are expelled during fossil fuel extraction and burning, combines in and has very negative impacts on air quality, which affects, again, both respiratory and cardiovascular health, as well as maternal and child health as well. Traumatic injury from intense natural disasters that are occurring more frequently across the country, as well as water and foodborne illnesses that are more prevalent when droughts occur. And then something that needs to be discussed even more is the emotional stress that folks are dealing with now with the increasing climate crisis, not just in the United States and North America, but across the globe. As was mentioned earlier, the global south is experiencing extremely devastating impacts physically and also emotionally from lack of resources and literally not knowing where those resources, that some of them are not, are not infinitely replenishable, not knowing where they're going to be, how they're going to take care of themselves and their family and their future. So next slide. So this list just goes through groups that are most vulnerable to the effects of fossil fuel pollution and climate change that results from it. And as you see, it's quite expansive, and a large majority of our aging melting pot society likely fits into several of these categories. The three criteria that kind of determine and exacerbate vulnerability in these impacted populations that are listed are exposure, sensitivity, and adaptivity. So exposure kind of goes back to that first and worst concept, where even if you have, a young, healthy individual, if they are in an environment where they live next to, fossil fuel industry, where they are constantly breathing in polluted air that from fossil fuels and natural gas that are being extracted and utilized, in addition to being in the rest of the world where they're dealing with the effects of climate change, the effects of poor air quality from transportation that also relies on fossil fuel. So they are dealing with pollution from home to out in society as well. So exposure is incredibly important. Sensitivity kind of includes how much the body can withstand, whether it's the impacts of polluting fossil fuels or also the resulting impacts of climate change that come from the usage of fossil fuels. So sensitivity would include groups like elderly individuals who have much more delicate body systems and who may also more than likely have resulting comorbidities like cardiovascular disease, heart disease, diabetes. So they're not as able to withstand for long periods high levels of heat or poor air quality. And then finally, adaptive capacity is very important to note again, because it's very, very linked to mental health. How able are you to withstand these extreme changes that our society is going through? What sort of network does an individual have? Are they able to change locations as easily? Are they able to afford remediation or repairs after their home goes through a natural disaster? Do they have a network where they're easily employable when they need to leave their hometown because their town was, suffered a devastating flood? So those three things really are really, really important. In even occupational groups, there are individuals who, as we know that the climate is changing and things are getting warmer and conditions are getting harsher, there are still folks who, work outdoors, whether they're in construction or agriculture. So again, bringing it back to even if someone is young and healthy, if they are working day in, day out in the elements in unsafe conditions due to climate change, that kind of wears down on the human body. So thank you so much for, these are just some resources just to continue to get more information and go a little bit deeper into some of the topics that I talked briefly through today. But thank you again for the time.
Okay, good afternoon everyone, and it's good to see such a nice turnout for this town hall. I'm Pali Singh. I'm a professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department, and my specialty area is renewable energy systems, particularly solar energy systems. So I just want to share a few slides with you, and I know we're running a little late, so I'll be fast. So this figure shows how the deployment of wind power has evolved over the last decade. And you can see that at least 103 countries have commercial wind power capacities, and 33 countries have more than 1 gigawatt installed wind power systems. And if you look at the countries which fall into the top 10, you'll notice that China is way beyond the rest of the world. But some of the countries you may not even think of, such as Vietnam, is in the top 10 in the world in terms of deployment of wind power systems. So, when you think about renewables and their affordability and the motivation to move towards renewables and the resources required, you can see that even small countries have the resources to invest, if they have the will. This is the growth of solar globally, and the last report here shows that in 2021 we almost had 1 terawatt of deployed solar production. And at the bottom there you'll see a little graphic that during 2016 75 gigawatts of solar PV capacity was added, which is equivalent to the installation of more than 31,000 solar panels every hour. And if you look at the amount that was added in 2021, 175 gigawatts, that's more than double that. So if you can imagine, over 60,000 solar panels every hour being deployed in the world. And so again, if you look at the contributions, China is leading in the world in terms of installations. So this graphic basically shows, if you look at the one on the, I guess I can use the pointer here, the levelized costs of onshore wind power and solar PV are now cheaper than fossil fuels on average. And then the last thing I wanted to show you here is that $366 billion was invested in renewables in 2021. But look at this, fossil fuel subsidies were $5.9 trillion. So if we say that we don't have enough money and we can subsidize fossil fuels to the tune of $5.9 trillion and only invest $366 billion in renewables, we have the money. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jonathan Doe. I'm an associate dean in the Villanova School of Business, VSB. I'm also a professor of management. And I'm here to really talk about the context in which this divestment discussion is taking place. And the way that I think about the context, in part, is in the broad realm of socially responsible investment. So I'm going to give a very, very brief history of socially responsible investing. I'm going to talk a little bit about the different strategies that investors use to advance their social responsibility agenda, and then a couple recent updates on what's going on in socially responsible investment in ESG. So first, socially responsible investment's been around for a long time, in the US history, really back into the 1800s. And it's often had a religious motivation. It was the Methodists that were first concerned about investments in what were then called sin industries or sin sectors, like tobacco and alcohol, gambling, etc. And I would say the socially responsible investment community was still pretty small throughout the early period of our history. But in 1928, the first dedicated socially responsible investment fund was founded in Boston called the Pioneer Fund. Fast forward a little bit to the 1960s, where there was greater awareness and concern about things like environmental and ecological impacts, defense contractors. And that was a pretty important, I think, stimulus or catalyst to additional scrutiny and interest in socially responsible investment. And then moving to the 1980s, where there was a lot of concern, obviously, about the apartheid regime in South Africa. And at that time, students at a number of major universities, and ultimately dozens of universities, pressed their leadership to divest from investments in companies that were doing business in South Africa. It was a controversial recommendation at that time, because some companies maintained that remaining in South Africa and sort of trying to foster change from within could be as effective as divestment. But I think ultimately divestment was considered to be quite effective at that time. Also in that period, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops issued their first statement about socially responsible investing. Way back in 1991, that statement was updated in 2003, and then again just in 2021. And I would say most recently, socially responsible investment has become more mainstream. So it had been that many smaller boutique investment firms were interested in socially responsible investment strategies, but now BlackRock and Vanguard and TIAA and Fidelity and others are active in that space. So what do I mean by being active in that space? There's really kind of three general approaches that investors or others use to advance their social responsibility agenda, or we might say sustainability agenda, through investments. One, we call a negative screening strategy. Two, a positive screening strategy or bottom-up strategy. And three, shareholder advocacy. Divestment, by definition, falls into that negative screening. So basically taking things out of a portfolio that are objectionable, be it fossil fuels or tobacco, alcohol, gambling, or whatever concern you may have. Conflict minerals would be another example. And a lot of the strategies up until maybe 10 years ago had that negative screening approach, taking things out of the portfolio that were objectionable. More recently, many investment firms and indices have developed a more, quote, positive screening approach to build a portfolio of companies that are considered to be high performers when it comes to what we now call ESG. And some of the indices that we look to are groups like the FTSE4Good Index, which has about 1,000 companies that it's identified as among the best performers in ESG. The Calvert Social Index is another one. And as I mentioned, many mainstream investors have constructed various types of socially responsible or sustainable indices as well as funds. Now, one comment about what a fund looks like when you tend to preference ESG performance. There are certain industries and certain companies that do especially well by nature of their business. So services do better than products because the potential for having these kind of harmful, damaging effects, whether it be human rights or environmental protection, is less. High tech does very good. So if you look at these indices, they tend to skew towards big technology companies, towards financial services companies, towards other types of engineering and architectural services, healthcare as well. What does that mean? It means that those portfolios are narrower, obviously, than an overall portfolio. And while they are generally viewed to perform just as well as a portfolio that represents the entire market, they tend to be a bit more volatile. They tend to have what the financial community calls higher beta. They tend to respond more profoundly to different shocks in the system. Now, let me conclude by saying a word or two about that third area. So I talked about negative screening, I talked about positive screening, building a portfolio of investments around high performers. The third area is what we call proxy voting or shareholder advocacy. This is where organizations buy shares of companies with a specific goal of influencing those companies' behavior. And they do so through something called proxies or shareholder advocacy proposals. And these proposals might ask the company to report greenhouse gas emissions. They might ask the company to provide same-sex benefits, or they might ask the company to develop a strategy to decarbonize. And that is increasingly what these shareholder advocacy groups do. One of the very active groups is actually another religious group called the Sisters of Mercy. You may have heard of them. And they are quite outspoken about their role as an investor and how they want to influence companies and company behavior. They are a member of an organization called ICCR, the Investor Center for Corporate Responsibility, Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility, a group of religious-oriented organizations that often collaborate in advancing these shareholder proposals. So they will decide on something that is important. They will file these advocacy proposals to multiple companies, and they'll show up at the shareholder meetings and verbally advocate. Now, 10 or 15 years ago, these socially oriented shareholder advocacy proposals rarely garnered more than 10 or 15% of the vote, and companies just ignored them, blew them off essentially. Increasingly, they are garnering 25, 30, 35, 40% of the shareholders' votes. And who are these shareholders? They're often big institutional investors. So big institutional investors, as I said earlier, like Vanguard and others, either often didn't vote these shareholder advocacy proposals, or they would just vote along with management. But increasingly, they do not do that. And let me just mention one case to conclude. Have any of you heard of an organization, it's an activist investor called Engine Number One? Does that ring any bells with anybody? A couple of you? So Engine Number One is an investment group that has organized specifically to try to push corporate change through its investments. And it had a proposal about a year and a half, 2 years ago, to try to get Exxon to replace a bunch of board members who were viewed as supporting the legacy agenda of Exxon, which is oil and gas extraction, with board members that would be more interested in and press the company to shift its business to a more renewable business. And 10 years ago, this proposal would never have had a chance. Engine Number One was a tiny little organization, didn't own many shares, but it convinced BlackRock and Vanguard and TIA and others to vote along with it. And they got 3 of these board members replaced. It may not sound like a big thing, but in their view, it was the start of something big. So just to conclude, socially responsible investment is not a new thing. It's been around for a long time. It is gaining mainstream interest and support. It is often advanced through either negative screening, positive screening, or the shareholder advocacy. And that's all I have for you today. I want to just give a little bit of context about socially responsible investing. Thank you.
Howdy. I'm John Charmanis. I graduated Villanova in 2000, a finance degree, and I promptly became a volunteer teacher. In 2005, I got into renewable energy because there's sort of a nexus, a way that I could use finance and, sort of make a change in this world. 2010, I started my own company called Connelly Sustainable Infrastructure. We're a private equity-style investment firm that invests in distributed renewable assets. And I hope to talk about today some considerations about why you might want to divest and what the implications of that might be. The first is climate change is real and is caused by human activity, primarily the burning of fossil fuels. That is, science, for the most part, has provided us that fact. So it may be a good idea to slow down climate change, as we've seen from some of our other speakers. Villanova is a Catholic institution, and the Pope tells us to take care of our common home. That's his term for the earth. And climate change is a grave danger to our earth, are his words as well. So he's our leader, and we should listen. Investing in oil and gas companies might not be the right risk to be exposed to. It might mean that you're investing with a company that knew about climate change but hid it. Divestment is happening widely, and that's actually changing the fundamental landscape for opportunities in the space. There are fewer oil and gas investments, which means you're taking more concentrated risk when you try to invest in them. The third is stranded assets, and I'll try to explain that to you shortly. And then lastly, oil and gas returns are very volatile, and returns are often made during times of conflict. Number 4, you can eliminate fossil fuel investment without impacting a diversified portfolio. And I hope to show you some very basic statistics on that. This is a chart that shows parts per million carbon dioxide in the top and global temperatures on the bottom. All those drops are ice ages. And all those other periods are warming periods. What happens is carbon dioxide is a leading factor in temperature. And through 600,000 years of history, it has never gotten above 250, 300,000 parts per million. We're now well above 400,000 parts per million. The logical thing would be you will see warming following, and that's what we've seen. So investors are becoming increasingly concerned about the financial risks associated with climate change. They really are. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, $10 trillion under management, Larry Fink. Every company in every industry will be transformed to a net zero world. The question is, will you lead or will you be led? Why is he saying this? He's saying this because it's risky to invest in fossil assets. Stranded assets. The value of a fossil fuel company, is generally their proven reserves underground that have not been extracted yet. If you cannot extract those assets, they are determined to be stranded assets. So there are some reasons why you might not be able to extract them. Physically, maybe you'll be able to get them. But government regulations are increasing, and they are limiting that, and there is carbon pricing. Number 2, there could be a change in demand. We're seeing more and more electric vehicles on the road. It is starting to grow. It's not giant yet, but it will come. And then finally, legal action against emitters. Make no mistake, the health effects are real. Legal consequences follow. And that's why you don't see coal power plants in the United States at the prevalency that you used to see them. Because the coal plants were sued by people that were dying, that were in the wake of the emissions. This is a chart that shows conflicts and the price for oil. You can see some very interesting things on the left-hand side, the Iran Revolution. So they're terrible in the late 70s. And the price of power went from $60 to $120. If you were invested in fossil, you would have made a lot of money. Those things happen again and again. The Gulf War, Iraq invades Kuwait. Oil production still accounts for a large chunk of government revenue in places like Venezuela, Russia, the Middle East, and parts of Africa. Since 2010, this is an interesting statistic here. Since 2010, the stock values of the 4 largest oil and gas firms have plummeted by more than half. That statistic leads up to just about a year ago. And then Russia invaded the Ukraine. And these are the prices of ExxonMobil and Chevron. They went up by over 60% over that period of time. 10 years of falling. They were falling because people were divesting. They were falling because institutions, endowments, large managers of money were saying, I don't want to invest in that. And the capital markets were backing away a little bit too. Then what are the arguments against it? So we shouldn't divest because a diversified portfolio is better for returns. There's a modern portfolio theory suggests that you must have a widely diversified portfolio where things are uncorrelated to each other. So if you took the entire S&P and you broke it into 10 different buckets, these blue lines are the different industries, and the red is the S&P. So this is over a period of time from 1990 to 2017. So red in the middle is S&P, 9.71 is what you would have analyzed over that period of time. Each of these are different segments, industry segments that you could remove. If you kept the 9 others and you removed one of these, this is how you would do. So if you look at the S&P, 9.71. If you had removed energy over that same period, you would have returned 9.74. Statistically insignificant. This is noise in the volatility of a typical portfolio. And it goes across all of the industrial sectors. So the modern portfolio theory gets challenged when you start to look at it in this context. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, which was referenced earlier today, is a framework for evaluating investments. And Villanova, like most other Catholic institutions, adheres to that at some level or another. There's some important tenets. There are some expressed things, and they were talked about. The sin stocks, right? You shouldn't invest in firearms or defense. Those are black and white. But we're also given a framework, and we're allowed to have judgment inside of that. You don't just have to do what you're told or not told, but there's a really good framework that's provided. The first is avoid doing harm, and you could simply do that by divesting. Second is actively work for change. We are actually called as Catholic stewards of our capital. They understand that we need to invest it, but to actively work for change. It's a really meaningful concept. And third, to promote the common good. So then there's some specific conference investment policies. And the last one on there is saving our global common home. This last statement is really interesting. What this means in terms of investments is that revenue should not be gained if it is gained by an unjust means, comes at the expense of human life, reduces the human dignity of others, or leads to the destruction of our common home. The science is proving that investing in fossil fuels, the fossil fuel corporations, are destroying our common home. I want to make an important point. We all got here by some sort of fossil fuel burning, something, probably today. Maybe some people came in an electric vehicle. It's not going to happen overnight. Divestment isn't going to solve the problem, but it is a very key cornerstone in making the change that needs to happen. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund did a divestment in 2014, and they did a study based upon it 5 years later. And these are their findings. It's a necessary and effective step, and absolutely essential for building momentum that can take on a rogue industry. The divestment movement is how we've built relationship, developed leaders, and capitalized solutions, and begun to take away the license of fossil fuel companies. It is sort of looking at them in the eye and saying, we're not going to take this anymore. And a lot of institutions have done that. Some people have talked about renewables already, but I really like this chart because it comes from an oil company called British Petroleum. So British Petroleum put this chart together. This is from 2020. And they show the global energy mix. This is all energy, okay? And on one side you've got oil, coal, gas, other non-fossil, and then renewables on the bottom in 1970. 2020, so 2000, I like to point out 2000 because that's when I graduated. 2005 is when I started investing in renewables, and we're at 2020 today. We're still a small amount. But in 2035, that's 15 years. It is a blink of an eye. British Petroleum says that the greatest contributor to energy globally is going to be from renewable energy. This energy transition is underway. It's not niche, and it's not something to be scared of. And if we're not investing in it, we should be investing in it. This is just another example of global capacity additions of power plants, and it just puts things into perspective. The gray bars are fossil plants, and the blue bars are renewable. What you can see is this trend of the fossil bars getting smaller and smaller, and the blue bars getting larger and larger. Until 2019, 2020, you see a major drop-off. The red line is on the x-axis on the left-hand side. It shows 80% of new additions were from fossil in 2020. So how do we make the move? There's some really good frameworks to do this. It starts with an investment policy statement, and that's some of the things that you're hearing us talk about, is the investment policy statement. What does our endowment have as an investment policy statement? And how can we address that to take on these concerns? Because it's been done, and this is how institution after institution has done it. And it starts with learning and education, which is what we're all doing here, and we should all continue to, because there's no stopping your education. Then building consensus and ultimately establishing a policy. Then you can assess, monitor, and communicate. So, thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, I'm also going to have have my timer open, so I don't want to go over 5 minutes, so I'll be quick. But let me get started. Hi, my name is Joseph Miskamara, and I am a co-founder of Fossil Free Marquette University, which divested in 2022. And I'm going to be talking about how to start a fossil fuel divestment campaign in just 3 easy steps. So first, a little bit about me. Thanks for having me, by the way. I was in Marquette University class of 2021. I studied environmental studies, and I specifically researched weather and water extremes in California. And I started the Fossil Fuel Marquette campaign after interning and learning about atmospheric rivers in 2019. And then last year I did a year of service through JDC Northwest and AmeriCorps in Montana. I was doing a science application out there. But I specifically want to talk about why I started the divestment campaign in the first place. And it all comes down to this number. And if you're unfamiliar, I think John was his name in the last presentation, talked about the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. And so the place that I interned at, they actually made this graph. This was updated yesterday. And you can see that the carbon dioxide concentration is, ever since the Industrial Revolution, it's been ramping up. And the safe level that census think that we need to get to is 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide. Right now we're at 419. So everybody take a deep breath in. You are breathing in an atmosphere that is more carbon dioxide than we have experienced in 3.6 million years, which, by the way, humans looked like that at the time. So it's been a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and I kind of view it as my responsibility to help make sure that this starts trending downwards. What I'm not going to be talking about today is climate change. We can all agree that we can sum it up in 10 words. It's warming, it's us, scientists agree, it's bad, and there's hope. And the hope is that we know how to solve this issue, and that's by limiting our fossil fuel usage in the future. And also right now. And why fossil fuel companies? Well, it's not just because they emit tons of carbon dioxide, but also because they have been lying about it for 40 years. They spend millions of dollars on climate lobbying. Their climate plans don't match up to reality. I could go on and on and on and on about all of the human rights atrocities that they've committed as well. But the point is, decarbonization is not radical. Fossil fuel dominance is. So we need to divest from these companies. And we already know that divestment works too. Like the other presenter said, it worked to help end South African apartheid. There's already been evidence in the last few years that has shown that fossil fuel divestment particularly has driven down company share prices, reducing capital inflows, boosting public acceptance of climate solutions. I mean, we're talking about, in the last 13 years, $48.5 trillion has been divested from fossil fuels. It's bigger than the economies of China and USA. That's a huge amount of money. Or sorry, it's not bigger, but it's close to that amount. So let's compare schools really quick. Marquette versus Villanova. Marquette can divest, so can Villanova. Obviously there's some differences here, okay? Marquette is Jesuit, Villanova is Augustinian. You guys have a slightly bigger endowment than Marquette. We have a better men's basketball team this year. We have a better women's basketball team. But they're very similar schools, and if Marquette can divest, and so can Villanova. So with that being said, I want to talk about the 3 steps that I mentioned earlier. And this is an oversimplification, but the first step is you just have to decide to do it, okay? And that's why I'm here today. I'm here to convince you that if I can, take initiative and to work with other people, some of my friends, to do this, then it can be accomplished. Educate yourself and others. And then the third step is to make your campaign known. Social media is your friend. Talking to classes, getting in newspapers is very important. And the cool thing is that steps 2 and 3 can be repeated over and over and over again. The more classes that you talk to, the more clubs that you talk to, the more people you can add to the group chat, add to the email list. It really makes a difference. Why should you start a divestment campaign? Well, first of all, besides the benefits of climate and public health, which is very fulfilling reasons to be involved in this kind of work, you can also develop real-world skills and knowledge. I mean, honestly, putting the fossil-free Marquette poll, all the details about that on my resume has been incredible. It's been the thing that I'm proudest of. I learned tons of skills, tons of knowledge about the economy and even graphic design and video editing and stuff like that. There's also no rules. It's not like a student organization. It's a campaign. You can do whatever you want, really. You can get creative with it, and nobody can tell you what to do. So if you are a student and you're interested in this, I highly recommend it. Briefly, I just want to finish up. I see I have 20 seconds left, so I'll make this quick. But the timeline. It took us 3 years to achieve divestment. We started out just with doing our initial research, meeting with students, this group called the Catholic Divestment Network. We also met with the chief investment officer. So the first year was really just about like learning and getting a group and starting things up and creating social media accounts, what our Instagram looks like. In 2020, things got sidelined due to COVID. We still try to keep people engaged online. And then in September, we had our first large-scale demonstration, and that helped us get some publicity in newspapers. That was really important. There was also a lot of external pressure too. Loyola Chicago announced their divestment. The Pope encouraged divestment. Creighton announced their divestment on the last day of December. So there was all this external pressure as well. And then finally in 2021, this is our big year, we met with Marquette student government. We wrote legislation. I heard that Villanova student government passed a resolution on Wednesday. That's a huge step forward. We did the same thing. So we passed legislation with unanimous votes in student government. We were endorsed by clubs ranging from Marquette College Democrats to Marquette College Republicans, which is crazy, but it happens. And then in April, we had a student referendum on divestment. We got 87% of students who voted in favor of it. We got on the front page of the newspaper. And after that didn't work, we actually filed a legal complaint. And there were some other leaders that did a really great job with this. They worked with some lawyers. And on March 24th, 2022, the new endowment policy was adopted. So this happened in 3 years. I want to give my time up soon, but I just want to thank you guys for watching. Here's my email address, and thank you guys for having me.
Okay, wow. Can we maybe just give one more round of applause for all of our speakers? Okay, so I hope after hearing all of that great information being shared that you firmly believe, along with me, that divestment of fossil fuels is key, especially given the detrimental effects that it has on both people and planet here and around the world. So there are a few ways in which you can act, if I can find the slide. So if you haven't already, you can take out your cell phones and scan that QR code that is right on the screen, which will take you to a petition that will call on Father Peter and the Board of Trustees to immediately divest from fossil fuels. And I can pull up the petition right here. So the first part of the petition is the call to immediately divest from all holdings, direct and indirect, in fossil fuel companies. Second is to commit to a new policy of transparency with the Villanova community that will allow us to be part of moderating the practices that govern Villanova's investment approach. Third is to engage in a deliberate process with the stakeholders in the university to determine how Villanova's investment approach can be aligned with the public commitment that Father Peter has already made to achieve carbon neutrality. Then lastly, consistent with the Catholic and Augustinian values of the university, commit to reach a net zero portfolio by 2030 and develop metrics to track that progress. And that report, we hope, will be made public within 2 years from today. So I will pull this slide up one more time. So if you haven't scanned it already, please do. And sorry, what else can you do from here? The Food Sustainability Initiative group on campus has 3 ways in which you can help contribute and combat the climate crisis just through food sustainability. So 1 is just eat less beef. 2 is to waste less and follow the food recovery hierarchy. And 3 is to help others by reducing food insecurity through things such as the Wildcat Meal Share, where students can donate a meal, which will go into kind of a holding pot for students who may not have a meal plan or are experiencing food insecurity. And then last but not least, mark your calendars for this really exciting and incredible event that is happening on April 18th. It's a collaboration between Villanova's Sustainability Leadership Council and the Office of Mission and Ministry, and is led by the wonderful Stephanie Senna, who's in the audience today. Some of the amazing speakers that you might be able to see there. Hold on one second, I want to get all of them. One is Jane Goodall, who many of you probably know. Cardinal Peter Turkson, who's like Pope Francis's guy on sustainability and the climate crisis. Naomi Klein, Bill McKibben, Raj Patel, Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, which is one of my favorite books, so I'm really excited for that, among many, many others. So if you don't know these people, I promise you will want to come and hear them speak. So take a picture of it, put it in your calendar now. Everyone should come and invite your friends, faculty, professors, etc. So yeah, and you can also scan that QR code so you can know when registration is available. So I think that is it. Here is, oh wait, okay. Here's the petition once again, and I'm sure if you want access to any of this information, it will be made readily available for you. And with that, I will turn it over to Jose, who will run the Q&A.
Hi everyone, thank you guys so much for coming to the town hall. To introduce myself, my name is Jose Garcia. I'm a senior here and also student body president. So another round of applause to all our amazing speakers and everyone in the audience who came out today. You might have some questions, but I'm gonna give this time to moderate the Q&A if you have any questions, and also invite the faculty and staff to up on the stage to answer any questions. So I have two people on the sides, Grace White and then Thomas Sassoy, who will be passing the mic. So if you have any questions, please feel free, and then I'm calling you. Not everyone at once. Great. Okay.
I was just wondering if anybody can tell us the administration's main reason for not wanting to do this.
I'm going to offer a speculative guess. I think it has to do with the desire to maintain maximum flexibility in ensuring the highest possible returns, sustained returns of the endowment. And also, I think it relates to John's point about portfolio diversification.
I also think that Villanova has a culture that is not about being super forthcoming always, and so institutionally we have a tradition of holding things a little closer to the vest.
I think it's great that we're going to get a chief sustainability officer. I was wondering if you know where that position will be in the organizational chart. Will they be answering to facilities management? Will they be answering directly to the president, I hope? That would be a good thing.
Father Art left, didn't he?
He did.
We've asked Father Art that question.
I think I
Al, can you
can
answer?
speculate that it'll answer directly to the president.
I'm curious if anyone knows to what extent the Board of Trustees is involved in the decision making, and also if there's any thought, concern, issue with members of Board of Trustees being on the executive committees of some of the oil companies, such as Shell. I'm wondering if that has anything to do with the decision. I can imagine if the Board of Trustees is involved and you have executives from the oil companies on the Board of Trustees, as we do, if that will be maybe a challenge or an obstacle.
I would just want to make sure everybody knows that the Board of Trustees has an investment committee that oversees and provides guidance and oversight to the university investment strategy. And there are faculty representatives on that committee, and Joe Discount was one of the new faculty representatives on that committee.
I also do want to mention that student government also sits on the Board of Trustees, and we have student representatives on those boards who, in our experience with it, when students bring up concerns, they're very receptive to those concerns as well. So.
Great, thank you.
Is it easy to find a mutual fund that invests in the same things that the Villanovans invested in, but without the oil and gas?
Yes. I mean, there's lots of mutual funds, lots of options out there. Some of them are ex-fossil. There's these negative screens that were talked about at one point with President spoke about it. There's a lot of options now.
I will mention that there is increasing scrutiny on some investment funds that claim to have a strong ESG investment but are not reporting actively. And so the SEC has issued 2 draft rules to try to push the investment industry to be more forthcoming. And a result of that is that the total assets under management that have some kind of ESG strategy are now reported as significantly smaller than they were 2 years ago, because some firms have not been able to provide this kind of information. This is all very positive. This means there's greater scrutiny, there's greater oversight, there's greater accountability when investment companies say that they have an ESG strategy. Increasingly, they really need to demonstrate that they do.
Yeah. The long-term divestment strategy, does that include the funds that are available for the retirement funds, the faculty and staff, the TIA and others? Is divestment portfolio part of that reach? Do you know anything about that? I know I haven't found that in my research. There's certainly possible investment options, but they're sort of very broad, and I am interested in that.
So TIA has access to a fairly broad pool of mutual fund options. I have not myself looked explicitly for a no oil or no extractive industries one. Maybe I've taken easy way out and I have mine in the FTSE for Good index, which has the benefits and challenges that I mentioned in my short talk. Because I find some of the companies in that index to be objectionable for different reasons. But you can't have everything, right? So that's the easiest first step in terms of managing your retirement portfolio. Or Caliber Social Index or something like that.
But the endowment does not manage the retirement.
No, separate thing. But you were talking about our retirement, right?
True.
Yeah.
And just as a part of the long-term strategy, our endowment's one thing, but the options we present to our own faculty staff is another.
On that point, there is a movement of educators who are working for TIAs for the best. And so that, as across institutions, they have an official complaint in the first stages. And so because I know nothing about finance or money or capitalism, but I do know that this movement is happening. So if you're interested, I can give you the email to take you to my
Right.
Just a question. So what would be your dream scenario? What would be the timeline of getting exactly what you're hoping to achieve out of the divestment process?
We engage in a public process. We have, the timeline gets met. I mean, our timeline gets met where we start talking about it now. We have a vibrant conversation. In my dreams also. Oh, and hey, if you're students, you should try to stick around. We're about to do the raffle. And we're going to raffle up $250 gift cards from Long Organic Market. So you stayed this long, I need to see this out. I think the only way that happens, the only way that we get what we want is with sustained student action.
So, I guess maybe to clarify, so not knowing when the Board of Trustees meets and who actually makes the decision to divest, like, what would be the optimal timeline you can anticipate from that big decision like Marquette had?
I mean, I think you can look at other schools' examples that they took a couple of years to do it. They were maybe earlier in the cycle. Many other schools have done it, and maybe that can accelerate the process here. But I think it is a process of engagement and talking to the stakeholders and working through it. And you know, folks have been receptive to at least a dialogue on the topic, which is a really positive first step.
And our investments committee for the Board of Trustees has a big meeting in April. Just saying.
Is it difficult to distinguish, to define what an extractive industry company is? It seems like you might have a company that makes a part of a drill, and maybe that's one of the main things they do, but they do other stuff too. How do you categorize these iffy things?
My understanding is that most mutual funds report investments by sector and by company. And they use some criteria to decide what falls in which sector. Typically there's a sector called oil and gas, or a sector called energy, or some combination of the two. I suspect that they're not necessarily trying to divest from every single company that has some ancillary or trivial connection to oil and gas. Because I suspect that would be extremely technically difficult. And it might dramatically narrow that portfolio so there's nothing left to it. John, you want?
Well, no, the only thing I was going to add was maybe just a little bit further on, maybe to talk about net zero for a moment, which, you know, there's divesting from fossil fuels and then there's a net zero portfolio. And there are a number of schools and institutions that are committed to a net zero portfolio. When we talk about carbon accounting, you can talk about your own direct footprint that you did that day. You talk about your scope 2, what are the answer, and then your scope 3, those industries impacts. So a net zero portfolio, which Villanova has committed to by 2050, is that there is some accounting that's going to be required, and some of those hard questions are going to be asked. So I think you're asking the good questions, and it does come down to focus groups and work to get to those details.
I do want to be mindful of the time, but, well, a few more questions.
Yeah.
Mine's a little bit related to the last question. I'm curious if there's examples of companies that maybe under pressure from Vanguard and BlackRock have actually transitioned from being large carbon footprint fossil fuel companies into renewables. I mean, does anybody go from the naughty list to the nice list, or no?
I would say that there are companies that have stated that they intend to move in that direction. And there's even been legislation in the Netherlands that has compelled Shell, oil company, to move more quickly in that direction, quicker than its own stakeholders. But I think it does raise an interesting theoretical question. If there were a company that committed to dramatically transition from oil and gas to renewables, would that still be a company that we or someone else wanted to divest from? And that's a question I've been asking myself.
I can also address that. So British Petroleum, BP, was in that sort of transition, and they changed their name, the BP, to be Beyond Petroleum, but it never really happened. So.
Maybe one more question.
If someone else has a question.
Anyone else?
I actually have a question for Joseph. As a student organizer at your university, from everyone I've talked to, the student voice is very crucial into getting this to happen. But as an organizer at your university, what advice would you give to students who are really passionate about this, especially given any obstacles or challenges that you may have encountered?
Did you hear the question, Joseph?
I heard that. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and that rings so many bells in my mind, because throughout the 3-year period that we were doing this, the one thing that I heard over and over and over again, not just from administrators and professors or staff, but sometimes even students too, is that they kept saying not yet. And in a lot of different contexts they would say that too. The chief investment officer during a conversation once told us, we're not yet ready to do this, the market's not there, or industries aren't there. From students, I was talking to some representatives on the student government, and I remember them telling us, no, that the student body is not ready to have a referendum yet because they don't know enough about it. And I thought that was the dumbest thing ever because, it was so dumb because, like, if we kept listening to them, then we never would have got anything done. And, I think you're going to hear that a lot as a student organizer. You're going to hear that people aren't ready, or that just, like, the general atmosphere is not, like, ready for change to happen. But I think, like, we need to recognize that this is a very pressing issue. These decisions should have been made like 10 years ago, but the second best time is right now. So I think, yeah, you just need to be persistent and understand that a lot of people are going to say no, but that doesn't, you need to remind yourself of why you're doing this work.
Alright, so we're going to do the raffle now. Rachel Reed will come up and we'll decide, pick a drawing. So get your raffle tickets out. I'm going to call the number. So one winner of the $50 gift card to Mom's Organic Kitchen is 1, 6, 3, 4, 6, 1. I'll say it again. 1, 6, 3, 4, 6, 1.
Amazing. Okay, here you go. There's your $50 gift card. Thanks for coming.
All right, one more winner. Drum roll. 1, 6, 3, 4, 5, 3. 1. Oh. Congratulations to our winners. Now I'll have Kathy do the closing prayer.
Thank you so much again to everyone for taking some of your time to be here this afternoon. Just to close, I wanted to read this poem by Mary Oliver, just to invite us to go forward thinking about what we might do next. So, who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth. Instead, who is gazing around with her enormous, and now she lifts her pale forearms, and thoroughly, now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life. So I invite you to think about that last question as we move forward today and what actions that you might take next, especially in regards to this urgent need at hand. So, thank you.